A millionaire thought his stop in a forgotten town would last only a few hours. But then his 11-year-old daughter asked to stay behind, washing dishes in a stranger's kitchen, and what she said next nearly broke him. The black Rolls-Royce. Phantom crawled along a dusty red road like a relic from another world, its polished body smudged by rising clouds of grit. Each turn of the wheels sent copper-colored dust swirling into an already heavy sky, streaked with dull gray clouds. No neon signs, no gas stations, no buzzing traffic, just brittle weeds, wind, and silence so thick it pressed against the skin. Then the engine gave a rough cough and quit. A shrill warning beep filled the empty air. Thomas Whitaker gripped the wheel, then let it go, exhaling through clenched teeth. Behind his dark sunglasses, annoyance cut sharp lines across his face. He tugged the glasses down, squinting through. The smeared windshield. Nothing. No cars, no lights, no help. 42, pressed into a gray, tailored suit, Thomas stepped out, his Italian shoes sinking into the red dirt. He checked his phone, swiped once, twice, harder, but the blank screen glared back. No service, he muttered bitterly. Useless GPS. The rear door clicked open. An 11-year-old girl appeared, blonde hair falling in a soft curtain as she held an iPad still glowing faintly with a paused cartoon. Her white dress, trimmed in pale blue, gleamed against the dusty road. Clara, his daughter, looked like she'd been pulled from a designer catalog and dropped onto another planet. "Daddy, are we lost?" she asked, not afraid, just curious. "I thought you never got lost." Thomas didn't answer. His eyes had caught a crooked sign nailed to a leaning tree. "Welcome to Glendale, population 431. He frowned. Glendale. A name that belonged in old novels, not on maps. It was a place that felt more imagined than real. No Wi-Fi, no Uber, no Starbucks. Just a sinking reminder that he had no control here. He grabbed 2 leather suitcases from the trunk, Clara trailing him silently now, iPad dark in her hands. Ahead stood a weather-worn wooden house turned into a diner. The sign above the porch, red in faded paint, Maple Diner. Pies and kindness. The words were cracked but still carried a strange warmth. The bell above the door jingled softly as they stepped inside. The air smelled of butter, cinnamon, and coffee. Clara paused, her eyes lifting in quiet wonder. The diner was small, cozy, almost like stepping into a family's memory. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 30s, chestnut hair pulled back, apron dusted with flour. She looked up, not startled, just calmly observing. "Afternoon," she said gently, as if greeting neighbors. "Find a seat. You're welcome here." Thomas didn't sit. He stayed tall, formal. "Anyone around here? Fix a Rolls-Royce?" The woman's smile curved like sunlight brushing water. "We fix pies," she said softly. "Cars like that? Not so much." Clara laughed out loud, bright, unguarded, startling even herself. The iPad slid forgotten into her pocket. The woman's eyes softened on Clara. "All I've got is pie. Hot cocoa and a sink full of dishes," she said. "But sometimes that's enough." And right there, before the night had even settled in, something inside Thomas shifted, just slightly. Followed wasn't awkward but full. Something had shifted before Thomas could speak again. Clara looked up from her mug of cocoa. Her voice clear and delicate, pierced the quiet. "Miss Eva, if I help you clean up, can I sleep on the sofa tonight? My dad and we won't bother you." The words fell like a pebble into still water. Thomas turned sharply toward her. Surprised, he opened his mouth likely to refuse, or to remind her this wasn't how things were done. But Eva's gaze had already found Clara's. She bent slightly, looked the girl straight in the eye. No one said anything else right away, just a quiet nod from Eva, and then very slowly, a smile. "If you truly want to help, she said, then I wouldn't have the heart to say no. Clara jumped to her. Feet her chair let out a soft wooden squeak. She followed Eva into the kitchen, her white shoes dusted with red earth, her dress catching faint smudges of flour, like proof that she belonged here, just for tonight. Thomas stayed behind, one hand still, wrapped around his coffee cup, the other holding his useless phone. He watched his daughter disappear into the back of the house. Her dress ruffled her golden hair trailing like a flicker of candle light, and realized this was the first time he'd seen Clara want to do something without expecting anything in return. Rain began to fall first, a patter like applause in slow motion, then a sudden downpour outside the window. The silhouette of the Rolls, Roy blurred under the sheets of water, its headlights reflecting a cold, fractured light. Thomas stood reluctantly, fetched the suitcases, and made his way back to the car. He switched on the heater, adjusted the seat warmer, but the damp crept in anyway, finding the spaces in between like the town itself wanted him to feel its unfamiliarity. A soft knock on the window. Eva. She didn't say a word, just placed an old wool blanket on the hood, then turned away without waiting for thanks, without expecting an explanation. Thomas watched her. Go the woman who tended warmth in a wooden house, who hadn't invited him but hadn't turned him away, and after a long breath he opened the door, stepped out, walked slowly back inside. Maybe it wasn't because of the rain. Maybe it was because Clara had chosen to stay. And for the first time, he realized it might be time he learned how to follow her lead. Morning came slowly, as if even the sun was unsure whether it should push through the old earth-toned curtains of the wooden house behind. The diner. A soft, hushed stillness blanketed Glendale, a town where life moved half a beat slower than the rest of the world. Clara woke early. No alarm, no honking traffic. She opened her eyes to the faint scent of fresh pastry and the quiet hint of browned butter. She sat up slowly on the worn plaid couch, now wrapped in a knit cardigan, placed there perhaps by Eva. Sometime during the night, in the open kitchen behind the counter, Eva was already at work on the first batch of cinnamon rolls. Her hands moved with practiced ease, flipping trays and dusting Flo eyes, occasionally flicking to the chalkboard by the window, where Clara stood gripping a piece of white chalk, carefully shaping big round letters, Maple Cinnamon Roll Tar 50 Eva. Came up behind her, adjusted the tail of the letter L, then gave a small nod. Doesn't have to be perfect, she said softly. Just has to be honest. Clara giggled, her eyes clear as a morning lake. Then I should add a line, one bite, and you'll remember it. Forever. Eva chuckled that one might cost $3 footsteps echoed by the entrance. Thomas appeared still in yesterday's shirt, a light sweater now layered over it, shoes wiped clean of the red dirt. His face was unreadable, tired perhaps, or simply trying to retrieve something he dropped between the hours of midnight and dawn. He approached the counter, pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, and placed it neatly on the old wood. The paper made a quiet but final sound as it landed. "Thank you for your kindness," he said, looking Eva straight in the eye, his voice calm and polished like the close of a business deal. "I think this should cover the night." Eva paused. She didn't look at the money. She looked at him. Her gaze was steady. Not angry, not offended, but unmoved. "I don't take money for kindness," she said, voice soft as rising steam. "But if you really want to repay me, the sink's waiting." The words dropped like a crack across still wood. Thomas froze, speechless. He'd never had his money, refused, much less been asked to wash dishes in return. Clara, sniffing the fresh rolls, lit up. She ran over, eyes wide. "Miss Ava, these are better than five-star hotel pastries. They're real." That word, real, hit Thomas harder than he expected for a moment. It felt like his daughter had stepped beyond him, like he, the man who had taken her to Michelin-Saint restaurants and glass-walled resorts, was no longer the thing that made her eyes shine. He stepped back, unsure. Clara stayed by Eva's side, chatting, away, asking about butter, about sugar, about the precise moment. A roll turned gold, golden instead of burned. Thomas stood there inside a world without Wi-Fi, without meetings, without assistance, and felt utterly misplaced. He turned and walked out. The door gave a soft click behind him. Outside, the sky was still undecided, hovering between drizzle and gray. Thomas lifted his phone, held it up, turned in slow circles, like a blind man feeling for light. Nothing, just the dull pulse of a signal icon that refused to wake up. He exhaled a long, drawn-out breath as if trying to release a kind of helplessness he'd never learned how to hold in that quiet, fog-hued morning in a nameless town. No one ever looked for Thomas Whitaker once. The man behind. 300 employees signing million dual contracts from elevators. Stood still, arms at his sides, unsure of his place in the smallest company he'd ever kept. Father and daughter. Have you ever felt left out, pushed to the edge of someone you love just because you didn't know how to be present at the right time? If you were Thomas, what would you do when money is no longer the answer? Leave a comment below, because maybe your story could be the key for someone who's still lost dusk settled. Over Glendale, in a hush of velvet light, soft but not gentle, it poured. Across the faded wooden kitchen table, casting long, pale streaks of shadow, as if the day were slipping backward without anyone trying to stop it. In the small kitchen, Eva sat, cross-legged on the floor beside a large basin of potatoes. Clara was right beside her, flower on her shirt. Her cheeks flushed from both sunlight and laughter. She clutched a paring knife, clumsily peeling each potato with exaggerated care. Every time the blade slipped, she let out a dramatic yelp, which sent Eva into small bursts of laughter that echoed off the narrow walls, warm and strangely new in a house used to silence. Thomas sat in the corner, quiet. The phone was still in his hand, but he hadn't looked at it in a long time. Its dark screen reflected his face back at him, blurred, distant, and faintly unfamiliar. His eyes never left Clara, not in the way a father watches a child with fondness, but like someone observing a world he no longer knew how to enter in the middle of a giggle. Clara held up a nearly peeled potato for Eva's inspection. Then, as if the question had been waiting quietly inside. Her all along, she asked Miss Eva, "Why don't you move somewhere else? There's nothing here. Your house is small. Your diner." Old Eva smiled, not with sadness, just a quiet stillness. Because when someone needs you, how that's home. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she turned toward her father. For the first time, she didn't look at him with admiration, but with something closer to inquiry. "Daddy," she said, voice soft and startlingly clear, "do you think people can be loved, not because they have money, but because they wash dishes, cook, and stay with others with their whole heart?" The room tightened. The air felt thick. Thomas opened his mouth. He wanted to respond something light, something reasonable, something that reminded everyone he was still the one who understood how the world worked, but nothing came. Finally, he spoke, voice taut and unsure, maybe. "But you're still young, you don't understand everything yet?" Clara didn't smile. She didn't pout or react like a child being corrected. She simply set the knife down, rested her hands on her lap, and looked at him steadily, sadly. "No, Daddy, you don't understand. I wish you were like Miss Ava, kind, without needing a reason." The words weren't shouted. They didn't accuse. And that was what made them land so hard. They were simple, unadorned, a needle to the softest, most hidden place inside him. Thomas stood abruptly. Didn't speak. Didn't look back. The door opened without a slam, but the cold wind that followed made it feel like part of the room had vanished with him. Clara bowed her head quietly, picked up the knife again. But now the peels came uneven, her small hands just slightly off rhythm. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Eva knew when a child begins to feel disappointment in someone they once idolized. It doesn't always come with tears. Night thickened more than usual inside the little wooden house. The golden kitchen light still burned like a flame, trying to hold on to something at risk of fading. Clara lay curled. On the sofa, a small notebook in her lap, writing carefully with a purple pen. Eva had gone to bed in the kitchen. The sink was full from a day of living plates streaked with sauce, cocoa mugs ringed with froth, a potato knife, still unwashed footsteps, barely a whisper. Thomas, he stood before the sink, the overhead light carving soft shadows across his tired face. His shirt sleeves were unevenly rolled. He turned on the tap, reached in, picked up the first dish. No one had asked him. No one was watching. No one needed him to do it. Which is why perhaps it finally meant something. One bowl slipped, crashed. The shatter rang out sharp and sudden, splitting the silence like a blade through the dark. Thomas knelt, gathered the pieces carefully. Blood beaded, at his fingertip blended with the stream from the foray. He didn't flinch, didn't curse, just kept going, bowl after bowl, plate after plate, as if trying to scrub something deeper than soap could reach his pride. His distance, the aching truth that maybe he'd been losing Clara for a long time now behind a half-closed door. Clara was still awake. She didn't move, didn't call out. She watched her father in silence, and her gaze steady. Still was no longer that of a child waiting to be. It was the gaze of someone who had grown up just a little in the span of one long, honest night. The morning after was impossibly clear, as if the rain from the night before had scrubbed the sky. Clean sunlight spilled through the window of the small bakery, spreading across the worn wooden counter in golden streaks, smooth and glistening like honey in the kitchen of Maple Diner. The air was warm as ever, but something was different. The sink was spotless. Dishes had been dried and stacked. Neatly towels hung with care. It looked as though a pair of clumsy but earnest hands had stayed up long into the night, doing something no one had asked for. No note, no claim, just a silent offering, and AA smiled, that rare kind of smile born in. People who've lost much and learned to receive even the smallest acts of care with deep, quiet gratitude. Clara was already awake. She tied her hair with a rubber band pulled from an old drawer and wore one of Eva's oversized shirts as an apron. She sat beside Eva, carefully packaging cinnamon rolls in brown parchment and twine, simple homespun bundles that carried the warmth of kindness inside every fold. Thomas entered the kitchen. His hair was damp, his shirt fresh, his expression calm, but no longer guarded. He carried a cup of coffee, this one brewed by Eva Clara. "Let's pack up," he said, eyes glancing out the window to where the Rolls-Royce now gleamed, free. "Dev dust, the car's fixed. It's time to go." Clara looked up, hands still busy. Tying a knot, her eyes narrowed slightly, like someone weighing a thought more important than most. Then she spoke, calm, clear. "I want to stay one more day." Thomas froze the cup in his hand. Suddenly heavier, the room seemed to pause with him. He looked at his daughter, the girl who used to ask, "What's the next stop?" now staring back at him, not defiant, not pleading, just honest. "No," he said, steady but firm. "You know our schedule. We have a reservation. There are meetings. Everything's been planned." Clara didn't argue. She bowed her head and went back to tying the last roll. But her voice came again, soft and steady, unshakable. "I don't want a resort. I want this just one more day." Thomas had never lost a negotiation with Clara, not because he demanded it, but because she'd never cared about anything long enough to insist. He looked at her, then at Eva, silent behind the counter, watching without pushing. She didn't speak, but placed an empty paper bag in front of Clara. A small gesture, a quiet message. "If she needs more time, I'll stay here with her." Thomas didn't know if it was the look in Eva's eyes or the ache in his own chest that hadn't quite left, but for the first time he didn't say no. He pulled out his phone, his fingers already moving, to reschedule, delay, rearrange, but then he stopped. No signal. The screen blinked with the familiar indifferent message, "No service." A final reminder that in this place his old world held no weight. Thomas stared at the screen, then slowly powered it. Off. No explanation, no disclaimer. So just this once he simply stepped closer to Clara, placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "One day," he said, voice softened as if he'd finally learned what it meant to make space for someone else's voice, someone else's want. Clara nodded and continued folding the bags. Ava turned away, but her mouth had curved just slightly. A father doesn't lose his daughter for making a mistake, he only loses her if he never learns how to listen. Evening slipped through Glendale like a fine mist barely there, yet leaving something behind. The last light of day retreated behind the hills, casting a warm golden wash across the slanted wood roof of the maple. Diner crickets had begun their song in the back garden, syncing with the slow, steady breath of a town preparing for sleep. No more engines, no more phone calls, no more. "We're running late. 3 people. A man, a woman, and a young girl sat side by side. On the creaking front steps, bathed in the soft glow of a single porch light. On the table beside them, a plate of still-war cinnamon rolls and 2 mugs of cocoa. Clara hugged a small pillow to her chest, resting her head on Eva's shoulder. Thomas sat beside them, hands resting gently on his knees, not touching anyone, but no longer held apart by distance. The breeze nudged the edge of the porch roof. A silence stretched long and open like the world itself was waiting for someone to speak. Eva did not with a question, not with preamble. "I used to have a bakery in Chicago," she said, her voice steady and stripped of sentiment, "with my husband. Small place, but always busy. We had a dream, open a second shop by the lake." Clara listened, eyes fixed on Eva's face. Then the accident happened. He died. The shop fell apart. I couldn't afford the rent one night. I slept under a bridge, still smelled like flour and butter. There were no tears in her telling, just pauses, long, honest spaces where the story could breathe. Ava didn't look at them. She stared out toward the tree line where the lights of the town faded into the hush of evening like watercolor bleeding into paper. "But I got up," she said, "because someone gave me a warm roll without asking. My name, I came here, nobody asked about the past. They just needed me to be Eva, the one who bakes, the one they trust." Thomas sat still, his insides falling through themselves. He had never told anyone that his mother died when he was 13, gone in a sudden car crash, just like Ava's husband had never admitted that Clara wasn't born of love, but from a quiet, contractual agreement between 2 people who no longer believed in it. He dropped his gaze. His voice came out rough. "So, why don't you hate the world?" he asked. "Why didn't you fall apart?" Ava turned to him for the first time in 2 days. She didn't smile. "Oh, I did," she said, her eyes steady and linus. "But I chose to be kind because if I broke, someone else might look at me and break too." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full. Thomas didn't respond. He took in a breath deep enough to hurt, and when he let it go, his eyes were wet. Ava placed a hand gently on Clara's shoulder. "I touch both soft and unshakable." Clara, wordless, reached up and placed her own hand on top of Eva's. Then she turned and with a quiet, deliberate motion, she reached across and laid her small hand over her father's, his hand still resting between them, loose and unsure. 3 hands, 3 generations, 3 people from utterly different lives. But in that moment, no one was a stranger. No one needed to say, "I'm sorry." No one needed to say, "I love you." There was only one thing that rang out clearly, woven through the wind, the hum of crickets, the soft flicker of the porch light overhead, presence, full and real. The next morning, the town of Glendale woke up slowly, as it always did. But something felt slightly off. The morning breeze was gentler, the sun hung a little higher in the sky, and in the kitchen of Maple Diner, something unusual was happening. No one said a word. They just quietly danced. watched Thomas Whitaker, the same man once featured in business magazines, now stood behind the sink. His white dress shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair slightly tousled from skipping the gel, and in his hand was a porcelain plate still smeared with baked-on butter. Ava stood not far away, kneading dough. Sweat glistened faintly on her face, but her eyes kept stealing glances at Thomas like a schoolteacher watching a new student struggle through his first spelling lesson. Clara sat at the counter, carefully writing the day's menu in white chalk. She pressed each letter with care. Homemade waffles, hot, crispy, made with love. The clinking of spoons and forks, the scrape of chairs, and the gentle slurp of Mr. Harry's oatmeal in the corner came together like a morning symphony, simple, rustic, and familiar. Then crash, a bowl slipped from Thomas's hand and shattered on the tiled floor. The sharp crack split the silence in two, freezing the entire diner for a breathless second. Thomas froze, eyes wide. Soap suds still clung to his fingers. The air stretched tight like a guitar string about to snap. And then from his corner booth, old Mr. Harry, a regular for decades, let out a booming laugh that filled the room. A billionaire in a Rolls-Royce breaks dishes just like the rest. Javi's hell of a time we're living in, ain't it? The diner erupted into laughter, no mockery, just genuine warmth, as if a stranger had become familiar. And once someone's familiar, nobody minds a broken bowl. Thomas looked around, stunned. Then for the first time in years, he laughed. Not politely, not performatively, a laugh that freed him. Ava stepped over, handing him a fresh towel. She didn't say much, just gently murmured, "Next time I'll slap a breakage insurance sticker on every dish." Just in case, Thomas took the towel and bent down to gather the shards. His hand trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. Clara watched her father, saying nothing. But her eyes sparkled in that gaze. There was no longer the man who scrolled through emails while she talked about school. There was a father one who finally dared to be wrong, dared to stay, and dared to clean up a mess of his own making. He kept washing dishes, slower now, but steadier. No applause, no praise, but everyone noticed and remembered. In that moment, Thomas wasn't a millionaire stuck in a small, forgotten town. He was the first man in that diner to truly know how to be wrong and to make it right with his own hands. His own water, his own silent redemption outside the sun climbed higher. The scent of freshly baked waffles drifted all the way to the street early the next morning. Sunlight brushed lightly across the tin roof of Maple Diner, casting a slanting glow on the wooden table still dusted with a few crumbs from the day before the diner hadn't opened yet. But in the kitchen, Ava had been up for hours. She was finishing the last batch of dishes, her hands moving over each plate with a practiced grace, as if gently touching the remnants of a peaceful day. The sound of the door. Thomas stood just behind her. He no longer carried the polished aura of a man who ruled boardrooms, but neither was he yet the father Clara longed for. At that moment, he was simply a man, unadorned, stripped of pretense, showing up as best he could. In his hands was a piece of paper folded into quarters, the edges worn as if he'd held on to it through the night. Without speaking, he slid it across the table. Eva dried her hands on her apron and slowly unfolded the sheet. Inside was a rough sketch, lines a little uneven, as though drawn with unsteady persistence. It showed a waffle, radiant with beams of morning light. Beneath it, in his handwriting, were the words, "Maple Light Bakery." A little light in every loaf. Thomas's voice was low, almost tentative. "It's not business, not a deal, just, if you're going to keep switching on that light every morning, maybe this name will help people find their way here." Ava didn't answer at once. She stared at the paper for a long, quiet stretch. Then, without warning, she tore it cleanly in two. Thomas froze. Not offended, just uncertain. She held out one half to him, her eyes steady. "One piece is the bakery, the other is a promise. I'll hold mine. If I can trust you'll come back for yours." Something shifted in the stillness, a tenderness breaking open like dawn. Thomas took the torn half. No smile, no vow. But his eyes, once guarded, now held something softer, human. Clara entered then, wrapping Eva in a hug so full it nearly lifted her off her feet. She kissed Eva's cheek and nestled against her as though she had found a shelter she hadn't known she needed. "You're the first person who ever taught me to do something just because it mattered," Clara whispered. "Not because it was graded." Eva's hand rested gently on her back. No words, just presence. Soon after, father and daughter walked to the car. Before climbing inside, Clara turned, sunlight catching her golden hair. She raised her voice so it carried to the porch. "If Dad doesn't come back, I will." Eva smiled, nodding. Thomas slid into the driver's seat. Clara buckled in beside him. No rush, no tension. Just two people finally moving forward together. The Rolls-Royce rolled. Onto the same dirt road Thomas had once cursed for being too old, too slow. Now its ruts seemed almost beautiful, like a path carrying something sacred away with them. In Clara's lap was a warm waffle, still wrapped, the paper crumpled from her tight grip. She leaned her head against the glass, watching the horizon, her voice soft, half to herself, half to a father she was still learning to know. "I'll miss this place. Not for the waffles, but because it's the first time I saw my dad be wrong and choose to make it right." Behind them, the light of the little bakery glowed, steady, gentle, like a lamp that never truly goes out. No grand finale, no soundtrack, just the hum of tires on dirt and a quiet knowing that would linger. Thank you for walking alongside Thomas, Clara, and Ava. If their journey touched even a corner of your heart, consider sharing this story. Because sometimes, in a world that shouts too loud, what matters most is simply showing up with your whole heart. We'll see you in the next story, where light always begins in the simplest of places.